Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to the November 25th meeting of the St. Mary's County Planning Commission for our work session for the St. Mary's 2050 Comprehensive Work Plan. I'd like to, before I forget, and that's why I'm a little flustered, I want to wish my wife happy birthday. She's home tending to the hams. So I would like to, it's a very special birthday for her this year, and I'd like to thank her. And hopefully she's watching. I'm sure of that. But anyhow, I'll let the board members introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, Judy Phileas.
Good afternoon, Lynn Delahaye.
Howard Thompson.
Joe Van Kirk.
Jay Cousineau.
Connor Lochran.
Patty Robrecht is on the way, will be here shortly. Also with us this afternoon is our Director of Department of Land Use and Growth Management, Jessica Andrich, her two Deputy Directors, Courtney Jenkins and Brandy Glenn, our Senior Planning Specialist, Gabby Gleisner, and our Planner 4, Stacy Clements. Also with us this evening is our Deputy County Attorney, Mr. John Sterling Hauser, our Acting Director of Department of Public Works and Transportation, Donald Mills, from the St. Mary's County Metropolitan Commission, Christy Hollander. Let's see. Our Director of Environmental Health for the St. Mary's County Health Department, Heather Moritz. From the Soil Conservation District, Haley Carter. Right here. Our video media producer today is Andrew Beckman. And also from Clarion Associates, we have Leanne King and Jasmine Davidson. I think I have everybody. Okay. Nifty little tune there. Okay. Okay, so this week we have on our agenda, we are going to hear the worksheets for the environmental and natural resources, followed by natural hazards, vulnerability, and resiliency. Jessica, good afternoon. Glad you're here.
Good afternoon. So just as a reminder, we are in work session number 3 of 6. We first started off with discussing housing. We moved on to public health and community services. As you mentioned today, we are looking at then the environmental and natural resources section, and then hopefully I'm able to move us relatively quickly through that. Then we also have natural hazards, vulnerability, and resiliency, as you mentioned. I believe that we're expecting somebody from our Department of Emergency Services, and I would think she's on her way. And then next time, which I believe is on Monday, we'll be tackling transportation and public infrastructure and facilities. And then December 12th, we'll be tackling economic development. And we're working in also the growth management section that we were not able to get to. And then we'll tie it all together through implementation. So
Bless you.
just as we went through last time, we're on the environmental and natural resources section, the framework and analysis there. And as you can see on page 2 with the table of contents, a little bit of background regarding the information we heard from the community. And you'll see that this section is divided up into 3 smaller topical sections: areas of critical state concern, then priority preservation areas, and water resources. Also on with us, I thought we had the sub-consultants as well, so there may be, if there are questions about any new language, we would be turning to them because we understand that they had significant input into I guess putting what the community had said, along with some of the principles and policies from the 2010 plan into this draft section. So without sort of belaboring the points on pages 3, 4, 5, and 6 and 7. It gives you a little bit of an overview of some of the common themes that were heard, how the section that we're going over today, how it was kind of thought about and put together. And you'll see that there are some key themes that are linked to policies. And that's on page 5 and continues on to page 6, and then explains briefly how this section will sort of guide decisions and actions, not only in our department, but other departments and across county government. So the real meat and potatoes of our work today, I think, begins on page 8 with goal number 1. And actually, just to give a little bit of framework here, we've got a couple of policies for goal number 1. Then we will be going through goal number 2, 3, and 4, I believe. And most of the stuff that we're going to be looking at is already part of what our department does. It's part of what other departments do, Donnie and his team. Also, our GIS and Eric Benson has been phenomenal in assisting and taking the lead on many of the mapping efforts that are evident through this section. So the first 2 policies, the first one is identify and map critical habitats. That's something that's already done. And you'll see that the next item is policy 1.2, conserving critical fish, wildlife, and plant habitats. And you'll see that there are action items under there. Like I said, most of these things are already sort of implemented and done as required by state law. You'll see references to COMAR, certainly references to certain sections of the county's comprehensive zoning ordinance that includes buffers and forest conservation and protecting habitats to support species, I'm going to say, survival here in St. Mary's that, makes our county a great place to live and raise a family. So those are the 2 policies for this. I don't know if there are any questions or issues or concerns.
Just a question. In the beginning, we talk, in a couple places, talk about targeted ecological areas. Are these areas mapped out, or are they by any chance in the map overlays? I didn't go back and double check that.
So I think these are actually, and I'd have to double check, but if it's all right, I'd like to defer to Stacy Clements, who's one of our subject matter experts on that. Is that something that you can answer?
Yes,
All right.
And welcome.
Good afternoon, board members. The targeted ecological areas are a state-mapped entity. We can access them through their GIS website, and I do frequently through everyday site plan reviews.
So St. Mary's County has targeted ecological areas that
Yes.
are on this state
Yes.
mapping system.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions or concerns for that first goal? If not, Mr. Chair, then we're ready to move to number 2.
Please.
And that would be maintain farming as a viable economic engine. And you'll see that there are quite a lot of policies that are included here. Again, things that the county is already doing. I don't know if there are specific questions or concerns. We can certainly make note of any questions that come. As I mentioned on December 12th, Economic Development will be here, and their office administers a lot of the preservation activities and items mentioned, so that if there are questions, we could certainly table those. Yeah, I can make note of them now, or you can just hang on to them and ask Economic Development when they're here with us next month.
Now, I'll ask, and it's okay if we table it, but how much of the land in the county is active farming? When we go to the next page, I see that there is a priority preservation area, which is 97,666 acres. I don't know if that's considered all farmland or if that is, that we're going to protect that amount of land. I wasn't sure because we're, in this area, there's farming and other, farming, forestry, aquaculture. I'm not sure what's what.
And I'm going to go ahead and make note of that
Okay.
question. I don't believe that that's one of the maps that has been put together, but I will make a note of that
Okay.
so that our economic development team can come prepared to assist with that question. Any other questions? All right. Mr. Chair, then.
Please.
If I may, that brings us to, I believe, page 13 with goal number 3, protect and conserve ecologically significant areas. And I did just want to make a note at the outset, so you'll see references to green infrastructure. That's not something that we talk about often. And so just to kind of give you an example of what those types of things are, green roofs, rain barrels, rain gardens, trees, they can even be something as simple as permeable paving, those kinds of things. So just wanted to clarify that, and that'll be something that'll be included as an item in the glossary. Jasmine, if you can make a note of that one, just in case. So with goal number 3, again, protect and conserve ecologically significant areas. And as you can see, there are 6 policies. They range, as you can see, from protecting the natural landscapes and infrastructure, maintaining forest cover and things like that to help kind of keep St. Mary's County beautiful, but also healthy. That's one of the things that we've been talking about is the overall wellness of our community and our residents. But we're also talking about things like preserving our scenic roadways and some of our historic areas, managing open space safely and as good stewards. And then, of course, the last one referring to when it says mineral extraction while minimizing impacts. Obviously, sand and gravel mining as an example, that's an activity that is jointly regulated first by the CZO, and we're talking about impacts to the surrounding neighborhood, odor, traffic, things like that. And then MDE then regulates what goes on inside of the mining site. So pretty broad spectrum of items. Most of these things are carryovers, as you can see, from our current comprehensive plan, with a couple of items inserted. Do you all have any questions or concerns? Yeah.
My concern is in 3.1.3. Over the years, we have heard a lot of horror stories regarding the flooding issues. And we have lately seen a lot of innovation, technological innovation in the reduction of that. You talked about the rain gardens and the trees and a few other things, but what is it that we can also do to ensure that these developments that are going in are not going to be, in 5-10 years, be victims of flooding
Sure. Well,
because of the down.
how water naturally drains
Drains
off a site.
down.
And so, and those are things that are all looked at during the site plan, the major site
Right.
plan process. as far as strategies for going forward, we do have and look, they've popped up on my screen in front of me. So we do have our sub-consultant team from IRG here. Would you all be willing to share a little bit of insight about this action and sort of help to address the questions that have been raised?
Yeah, there's a few different ways to maybe talk about this in context. There's really kind of there's scale elements to it. The Maryland's green infrastructure, the ecological network, a lot of those areas have been identified as very important in providing land that mitigates flooding and reduces the need to have those kind of urban interventions like rain gardens and green roofs. So it's all thought of as an interconnected system. So it's really a combination of being able to do, shall we say, upstream preservation of land that's in strategic locations. And then once you're in the urban areas, having an understanding of the engineering, the topography, to figure out where to do very targeted interventions, whether that's rain barrels, downspout disconnects, green roofs, all of the different array of what I'll call site scale green infrastructure. The key at least in my opinion, from a comprehensive plan perspective, is there's an acknowledgement of, in particular, actions and interventions that the county can do and how that interacts with activities of land trust and the state agencies that are working on the broader, larger pieces and land acquisitions and all of that. And it's all treated as one single system, and that they complement each other.
Let me ask a quick question about same 3.13. I know it's a new item. It says use green infrastructure to locate data to identify all these problems, whether there's problems with conservation easement, habitat cores, reducing stormwater and nuisance flooding like Patty Mack recommended. But it doesn't really say what they're going to do other than identify. I mean, should it say identify and implement, identify? I mean, it doesn't have an answer. It just says they're going to identify them. Well, what's going to happen when they identify any issues?
Yeah, we can certainly put more of a sort of action forward item in here, and we can bring it back to you all at the next round, if that's okay.
Okay.
All right, because it's a really great question. All right. And since you brought up that particular action item, we do have another new one on page 15, and that's action 3.3.5, prioritizing native buffers in headwaters, wetlands, and tidal transition zones. Looking at the language and the fact that it's new, if we can have IRG kind of speak to what's going on here, and how did this originate? What does this look like as we move forward?
Sure. Basically, when we looked at the other policies, we identified, if you look back at the other actions, there are some 331 related to native buffers, 332 and 333 in terms of really focused on wetlands, streams, avoiding alteration of wetlands. There are areas that are kind of further upstream from a lot of those key things that were incorporated into the policy, and an idea of really trying to move up and focus on doing the restoration activities. So a lot of it was the original policies were make sure this doesn't happen or make sure this is protected. This is looking a little further up and saying, let's go back and try and improve those systems. So really 335 is intending to augment the previous policies that you had in place.
Okay. One concern that I noted in my review was that this particular action item says that we would be requiring a feasible alternatives analysis before any buffer disturbance. And I did want to ask about that. I don't know, that seems like it could be cumbersome for property owners. I don't know what a feasibility alternatives analysis might be, who would conduct such an analysis, but I did have a concern about that. Can you share a little bit about that language and how you see it impacting property owners if they wanted to move forward with, I'm going to say development or redevelopment of their property or their homes?
Sure. It is an identified best practice to, when looking at site planning level situations like this, look at if there are any reasonable viable alternatives. The design of that process and what the outcomes are can be a function of essentially the county decision-making infrastructure, meaning you may just simply have a process that said, yes, we acknowledge that we've looked for feasible alternatives and either there are some or there are not, and leave it at that, but it doesn't mandate a particular solution. It doesn't necessarily mandate that you implement an alternative. It's that the process was gone through to take a look at that. So that's the intent of that, is to give the option to incorporate that best practice, but then calibrate the exact implications of that process to meet your local needs.
So instead of require, could it be, explore? Because require just seems to me like it could be potentially expensive. And how does a person really demonstrate? And I know that would probably come from our any sort of code update. But I just was concerned about that word require being in the draft language. Is that a change, IRG, that you would be comfortable being made?
Absolutely.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, again, this is your meeting, and you all are giving us some guidance and direction, but this was just something that came to my attention that raised some concerns for me. I assume that you wouldn't have any issue if the language was changed from require to something explore, something like that. Any issues or concerns there?
No, but I know sometimes the word require is needed in certain cases, but I don't think so in this one.
Isn't this what MDE looks at, Maryland Department of the Environment, when they do their review of their plans, looking at what you've got to plant, stable, those types of things? Isn't that part of the normal process?
Depending on the buffer, the location, and things like that, it can be part of the process, but it's also something that's implemented in our office as well. And if you have any specific questions about that, Stacy is here, but if that answer suffices, then we can move on.
I don't think the word require in this context is bad. It doesn't say you have to require an alternative. It just says require feasible alternative analysis. So it would make each landowner, homeowner, developer who wants to disturb the buffer at least make somebody at least look at an alternative analysis. It doesn't say there has to be an alternative. It just says that let's look at it and see if anything else could possibly be done. My, just one person's opinion, does not think, and all of us making them do is maybe look at another alternative that maybe nobody thought of, just provide an analysis of what you could do instead of encroaching to 100 feet. Could you encroach 75 feet if you did this? That's to me, but that's just me.
Sure, and I know that's some of the back and forth that our office, does provide when meeting with clients and customers. So, I mean, we're willing to take whatever direction you all have to give on this one, but it was just something that seemed like we should discuss, being that it was a new item.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, if you have.
How's the board feel?
I thought we already did it. So I kind of don't have a problem with the word required, as when, I'm assuming before you get approved in your site plans, they've looked at it. I know when I've looked at some family property in Piney Point, I was referred to, the Maryland Department of the Environment, on how I could start minimizing some of the flooding that's occurring, in an area. So I didn't have to do that, but I know homeowners building new do. So I don't know. I'm okay with it either way, really.
My question is, this feasibility alternative analysis, would that add any time to a permitting process?
It certainly could. I don't know what that analysis, I don't know what that analysis would look like going forward. Stacy, if you maybe want to give an overview of what kinds of things are looked at from an impact perspective during your review of plans, but maybe that would help.
Okay. During the site plan review for, let's say, a critical area disturbance, we would look at streams and their buffers. If it's within the critical area, it would require a 100-foot buffer. If it was outside of the critical area, it's a 50-foot buffer, and that's for for perennial streams. And then you've got the intermittent streams that are a little bit slower, and those require the 50-foot buffer. So we're looking at all of the buffers for streams. We're looking at the buffer for wetlands, 25 feet, and the wetlands themselves, and then 25 feet are all regulated by MDE. And then in addition to that, we're looking at the 100 feet for the critical area buffer off of mean high water. If any disturbances to that, then we pull in the critical area commission, and we we request that we give them an option. Either you can revise and remove the disturbance to the buffer, or you've got the variance process, which requires a lot of mitigation for the helping of the habitat and the water quality standards to help mitigate any disturbance there. What else do we look at?
So that is somewhat of a feasibility alternatives analysis if you're a property owner trying to decide between a variance and not needing a variance. That would be something that they would explore in our office, would help them to understand what the regulations are. So that'd be one example.
But I think when it gets down to the brass tacks of we need a disturbance, then I think whether it's your office or whether it's the
Critical Area Commission as an example.
right that or the Board of Appeals,
Indeed.
I think it's going to go to one of those three things. And if you leave that in there, which I personally think it should be in there, then I would think language would need to be added to the CZO, wherever that is, saying that for disturbances of the buffer, just need to require a alternative analysis. Doesn't say anything has to be changed. It just says we're going to look at it, or you're going to look at it, or somebody is going to at least consider it there. I mean, I always thought there should be things looked at or proposed. Just because somebody comes in with a 3,000 square foot house plan on a quarter acre lot and they're imposing on the buffer, well, then you make them reduce the size of the house. I never see that happening. I know everybody wants to properly use their property, but to me, there would at least somebody would look at that stuff. That's all I'm saying.
If we would say require the feasibility alternatives, should we list them in a subcontext underneath that, what those would be? I mean, is that a long list, Stacy, of things that would be needed?
It would be, disturbance to any of the stream buffers, wetland buffers, critical area buffers. We could come up with a list.
There's quite a few already
And
in our current policy.
Yeah, I would just think all they would need to do is say, okay, we're going to look, they want to build on lot one of this subdivision, and the need to go 50 foot into the critical area buffer, let's look at what we could possibly do. And if nothing, then, they got to go through the appeal process.
Sure, and
But
we can come
it's-
up with some language to bring back to you.
Since it's a new action item and, it doesn't have I'll say a subtext to sends it to the 2010 plan, if we could come up with that.
Yeah, no, we can certainly explore that. Jasmine, you've got that on our list? Okay. All right.
This is also validates how a map, a GIS map would better show exactly what we're talking about. I mean, the extent to which what are we dealing with specifically? Like the farmland, we can see that on the map, and the wetlands, sort of, kind of, but
Well, so Stacy, can you maybe explain the types of natural features that are shown in the GIS system that we might not
Yeah.
have them actually in our packets today?
Wetlands, streams, watersheds, things like that on our map layers.
Yes, yes, we have
yeah, that would,
streams, we've got slopes, we've got soils, which, can expand some of those buffers too.
And all of that
It's-
information is currently available on the GIS system.
Yes, on our county
Oh, it's already
website.
there.
Yes,
Yes.
and Mr. Benson and his
It's
team
amazing
just
what's there.
recently
Everything here
updated
on the
it
right
and
I
revamped
see
it.
it
and-
breaks it
Beam.
down.
Extensively.
Yeah, and
It's-
that's something
it's
that we,
there.
we show to customers when they come in, or somebody reaches out and says, hey, I just bought this property, I would like to explore my options. This is one of the first tools that we pull up to kind of show them, okay, here's what our GIS system is showing for the property. Certain natural features that are already present have been mapped and confirmed. Maybe it's a matter of going out and field delineating them, but a lot of that information is already there and available to the public.
And maybe we should document that in our plan. That, there's a lot of tools for
Indeed.
everybody in this county to be able to utilize to make the right decision,
Absolutely.
so that we don't have to be the bad guys when it gets here.
And I will say, to the extent that this provides some comfort, our department is working to update our website also to put certain information sort of more customer forward, so that things like that aren't buried in the lead, so that people can go click on one particular icon that says, hey, mapping services, go here. And so that's something that we've been working on actively for the last several weeks, is an update to our page to help our customers with information like that. Yep. All right, anything else before we move on? All right, Mr. Chair, then
Please.
that brings us to page 18 and goal number 4. Protect and enhance water resources. And as you can see, we have 6 policy items, and I believe all of those are carry forward from the current comprehensive plan. Most of the stuff that's listed in here is a product of, some of it comes obviously from the federal law and, Clean Water Act and things like that, passed on then to the counties through the state. And so we're looking at state law, state regulations through COMAR, and a combination of our comprehensive zoning ordinance as well as our stormwater management ordinance and things of that ilk. So none of these are new. They're all carry forwards. I don't know if you have any specific questions on any of these.
Jessica, when we see that things are carried forward, does it mean that the goals, the policy, and everything is just verbatim as what it was in the other plan?
There might be a little bit, a tweak of verbiage every now and again. We encumber a little typo, or something could be said a little differently. But so it may not necessarily be a cut and paste, but there is no significant change.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other questions? All right. Well, then we can close the big packet.
I do have one question.
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
looking at, it came up when I was looking at policy 4.4, protect and sustain groundwater and drinking water. Who evaluates and gives us inputs on the status of our aquifers which provide water to most homes here. I mean, I don't know how many aquifers we have. Are we no issue with them? Is that something the National Geological Society does, or is that, how is that evaluated?
I'm going to defer to Ms. Heather for this.
And that I would have to look into. I know of 3 or 4 aquifers that we use here for our community water supplies, as well as our private on-site water supplies and everything. I know that for our community water supplies, MDE monitors the water being withdrawn from the aquifer, but how those aquifers are managed as far as how sustainable they are, I don't know that. I'll see how we could find that out,
See if
so.
we could, because we're planning on all this development, and we just assume they are okay. But are they?
All right, so we can come,
Doesn't,
Why
doesn't
don't we
Metcon-
ask Christie,
thank you.
since we're doing a lot of the development districts, and they usually provide all the water for the development districts, and she is quite the expert on that, so.
So what Heather noted is to the T correct. We have groundwater appropriation permits through the state that tell us how much water we can pull out of the aquifers. I don't know, I mean, I can tell you what the limits are, I can pull that up, but I don't know who regulates how much water is left in there and who can have it and all that. That would be the state. So any new development comes through, they have to do water studies if it's 25 homes or more, to look at our existing facilities to see if a new well is required, if a new tower is required, if pipes need to be larger. So that all gets done by the developer. And then we take the infrastructure over once done.
Wow. So there are limits on how much water you
Yes,
can
ma'am.
pull?
Yes, ma'am. And if say a more standalone system goes over that limit, we can incur fines. So we keep a pretty good eye on that with our billing and our metering to make sure that we're staying within that limit. But it does happen sometimes, the smaller community systems, like during the summer with watering your grass and things like that. We have gotten close on a few. But they very much monitor that, and we do as well, to make sure we're staying within those limits.
Interesting.
Thank you, ma'am.
No problem, thank you.
okay, any other questions for the team before we move on? All right, so that, we can set, like I said, set aside the big packet and move forward to environment, sorry, bear with me, let me set the whole thing aside and work towards our natural hazards, vulnerability, and resiliency. So as you can see on page 2, again, information. I see we've been joined by Amy Bledsoe. If we can just switch seats for just a moment. Stacy, thank you very much for joining us today on the environmental aspect. And Amy, if we could ask you to join us. Front and
Bless you.
center. Thank you. All right.
Okay, and what was your name, ma'am?
I'm Amy Bledsoe. I'm the emergency manager, St. Mary's County.
All right, so as we move forward then with this section, you can see that we have 2 overall goals, a little bit of information, background information on kind of the history and the significance of the resources that we have here on the ground, and then also feedback that we received from the community during our 2 community engagement windows, and then carrying on pages 5 and 6, kind of an overview of certain principles and applications moving forward. And so as we get to page 7, you'll see our first of 2 goals, which is to increase the county's resiliency by preparing for severe weather events. That's the first one, and you'll see that there are several policies that will aim to help us achieve that goal. Most of them are, the policies are sort of carry-throughs from, or carry forward from the current comprehensive plan, but I did want to make note of policy 1.2. That's on the top of page 8, strengthen floodplain and storm resilience. And as you can see, that one is a new policy, but I'll just say a new label, because as you can see, most of the other action items, those are still carry forward. So I think this was more of a kind of housekeeping change. I don't know, IRG, if you guys have anything you'd like to add regarding the development of policy 1.2?
Does anybody have anything?
Yeah, housekeeping is probably the right way to talk about it in terms of, we talked earlier about how there was a question about whether we literally copied and pasted versus changed words and things. This is an example where there was enough of a word change to focus the fifth action on sort of things that aren't talked about in the other four, but to give the holistic picture, particularly related again to essentially stormwater management on farm sites. Jamie, do you have anything else on that one?
No, I think you've captured it.
If I could just, no, you go ahead.
How do we know, for instance, take 1.2.2, where it says, I'm sorry, it was 1.2.3. It says revise the flood plain ordinances to raise the freeboard requirement by 2 feet. How do we know that happened? I mean, if it was in there before, why would it be in here again if it was satisfied? That's the issue I have with cutting and pasting. There's a lot of actions. Are they done? If so, why are they taking up a space?
There was Leanne speaking here from Clarion, there was a process by which these drafts were vetted through by various departments with the county. So we did a lot of cleanup with respect to that during that internal review before sharing the version that was shared with you. I can't speak to this particular item that you mentioned about the floodplain ordinance adjustment, but there was a process to try and pick up and catch those things that might have been implemented since the last plan was developed.
Okay, thanks.
Right. And we also have one of our certified floodplain managers, Stacy Clements, our planner 4, that's also joined us. Stacy, do you have additional thoughts?
Yes, we revised updated the floodplain ordinance back in 2016 and adopted it with the freeboard being not just 2 feet, but 3 feet above the required freeboard elevation. So that would just mean you've got your base flood elevation. Let's say it's 5 feet in elevation. We would require your house to be raised up to 8 to protect you from those floodwaters and a little bit more. Okay, so we have implemented it and gone above and beyond for that one.
So that can come out. Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha. Action 1.2.
Okay, and I see Jasmine's nodding, so we've made a note of that. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just had one question. I'm just looking at some of the terminology on page 4 and 5, and I was just curious about, bottom of page 4, we talk about stakeholder, we emphasize cross-coordination with agency and partnerships, including implementation of recommendations from the Military Installation Resilience Review for PACS. And I'm just kind of curious, is there any, because then we mention it again when we look on page 5 at the framework principles and levers. The fourth one, we say integrating defense community resilience planning. Is that something specific? What exactly is that?
Amy, are you able to speak to that?
So I was involved a little bit, so I can tell you what I know about it. There was a resiliency study that that Pax River was also involved in, along with our community, and there was some recommendations carried forth. So essentially, if the base is doing well, then the community does well. If the community is doing well, the base does well. But as to the result, I'm not sure. I was
That's
not
just,
involved in that part.
I do know for the plan that Amy is speaking of, you can go to DED's website, and the final results are posted there from.
the DED website?
Yes, yes. So if you go to the St. Mary's County website and then go to the Department of Economic Development, and they have plans and plans and ordinances, and there's the plan that was done with NAS PACS.
Okay, yeah, I was just kind of curious what kinds of things. We obviously work with the base and take their inputs, very seriously because, of who they are for us. But yeah, I just didn't have a sense of what that was really addressing. So I'll look. That's all.
Right. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have one more.
One more. You knew I was pointing. You don't have to go that far. Is the 2016 floodplain ordinance then, it's been revised, it's a more recent date, right? Oh, so you did the 8-foot the 8-foot. Yes, we did the. Without changing, was it just an addendum or something to the
No,
ordinance?
it was approved with the 2016 floodplain ordinance update.
Oh, so it's been that long ago?
Yes.
Okay, all right,
Okay.
that's all.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions?
Could you explain the new item on there, action 125?
Yep, on-farm flood mitigation, and as you said, this is a new item. IRG, can you sort of lend your voice to this one?
Yeah, I mean, the concept here is to slow storm water on farms before they flood the roads and neighborhoods. And so this is an incentive for farmers to really help them establish best management practices that mitigate this. So it is intended to be a cost share that makes it affordable for farmers, and then giving the county this measurable set of resilience and water quality benefits as a result.
Okay, and it says that we're, as you said, offering the cost share. Would it be okay and appropriate to have this sort of be an option, not necessarily, the county with the adoption of the comprehensive plan, we are going to offer this cost share program, because I'm not exactly sure where those resources would come from, certainly as I'm sitting here, but just exploring that possibility.
I think explore might be a better word.
Okay.
Explore the option for, so just to, because that was our intent.
Sure, okay, great.
So this will be all farmland, or just where they're building a house? Or, you're going to just go to farmers and offer them, hey, you got 100
We
acres
really
here?
were, yeah, our intent here was to focus on these 100-year contributing areas. So really where these are areas that are highly prone to flooding. And in particular, because of the elevation, they would then be impacting the infrastructure, so roads and outlying areas outside the farms.
Okay. Is there any limits on, I know the word farm, you can find 20 different definitions of what a farm is. 5 acres, 20 acres, 1,000 acres. Is there any limits on like the amount of land that it would have to be to qualify for a possible cost sharing?
It's a great question. So the two sort of considerations that we put here were, one, it needed to be geographically within that, that 100-year contributing area. And then second, that the farm itself would need to have characteristics. And we put those in parentheses. So we said, on-farm ponds, micro storage, controlled tile ditch structures, grass waterways, they would need to be capable of those things. So if it was just sort of a standard farm field, it may not qualify because those BMPs may not actually mitigate the issue. So it wouldn't be, I think, by virtue of that analysis, if you did it, you wouldn't really be qualified if you weren't going to be able to build out those BMPs in a way that would be impactful.
Okay.
So it's a relatively small portion of farms in the county, I would expect, as a result of this. And again, many of these farmers are already receiving cost share from other sources that might also mitigate this, which is where we were really looking at an exploration of this option to further incentivize farmers.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The ditch structures. You often see a lot of ditches that, because of the runoff from the farms, you can see them, I mean, they're full. Like on Medley's Neck Road, they're awful. So is that what, I mean, how would the county implement this without impacting the state road? That's not state road, it's a county road, isn't it? Do you know what I'm saying? Where's the line drawn between doing this and having the owner of the farm or owners get funds to take care of it?
I mean, I think there's parts where you have a farm that drains to a public road.
Right.
I mean, that's all over the place. But I think if they were able to implement attenuation of flow or something upstream, then maybe they could offset the impact that we're seeing at a public road downstream. Could be someone else's property too, not necessarily a public road. Public roads would be great to have upstream, whether it be farm ponds, things like that, that could take away or attenuate the flow at a location. Let's pick on like Bayside Road, for example. So it's a good one to keep open, and it's a lot of farms there. If those farmers were able to do something, then, you know, the 36-inch pipe that we got there might actually be able to handle that flow for the major event. Now, you know, at some point, you know, they're talking about this 100-year contributing area. So, you know, a lot of times when you're talking about that 100-year storm, it's normally no roads are designed for the 100-year storm. You know, we don't, it's not for our road network.
I remember you saying that before.
Yeah, well, we have the 25-year.
Right.
Is our largest storm. That's going to be for your major roads. Now, FDR may be designed to a greater, 50-year or something, but majority of our roads are at that 25-year max.
So nobody would qualify?
No, I mean, I think they would be saying, taking an existing condition, you have a farm, and there's a problem downstream, whether it be the county right away or it be, another subdivision or something that's downstream. It sounds like they would have a way to have a option for that farmer to build something, maybe cost sharing, whatever with it, maybe even grant fund it. But then they could attenuate the flow, and then we would see less of an impact downstream because there was currently nothing built, just farm fields.
We have that.
Thank you.
Donna, but not only talking about farm fields and stuff, but when a design comes in for stormwater management, nobody makes anybody design anything for a 100-year flood, do they? Or
Right. We do in adequate outfall, we do analyze all outfall locations from a site. And what we're looking at is that they have to be, that flow that leaves the project is to maintain that no increase to that, So when we're doing that, a lot of times what you're seeing is they're doing ESDs to the MEP, doing small, that's Maryland's guidance now, to do all these small stormwater devices. So what we try to encourage to the designers that they can, and it only works for certain devices, but we try to get them to chain them together or cascade them together so we can attenuate the flow somewhat.
Okay.
And then on top of that, if we already have a known downstream flooding, then they're going to be doing channel protection volume. They're going to be storing more on site.
And releasing slowly, letting it release slowly, is that what? Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions, or are we ready to move on?
Please.
Okay, like to direct your attention then to page 9, policy 1.4. This one's a new one as well. It says enhance risk assessment, mapping, and public awareness. You can see that there are 3 action items underneath that. 2 of them are direct carryovers from the current plan, and 1 is new. So do you have, again, the new action item focuses on public education, just making sure that we're going out and either meeting with citizen groups, making information available on our department's website, having pamphlets and things go out in with property tax bills. There's lots of ways that we can educate our residents, and this is just really focusing the need on doing that as we move forward. So are there any questions about this particular policy and one minor action item?
Stacy, is 1.4.1 map vulnerable lands, since that's an existing, it just carry forward action, are those lands already within the GIS maps? I mean, would it say this is vulnerable for some reason of flooding or erodible soils, or I don't know what it would be really mapping them for? Is it just for critical area flooding, or?
Okay, we currently do the FEMA flood maps on our GIS, along with our highly erodible soils, our steep slopes from 15 to 25, and then 25 plus. Currently, we are not mapping the sea level rise.
But all the other things are currently mapped and
Correct.
updated.
And there are sea level rise maps from state agencies that have been layered over ours as well.
Okay, thank you.
Are those layers, are they found on the St. Mary's GIS? Or
I'm sorry, can you
where
repeat?
would someone find those?
It's, all the layers are in the St. Mary's
Okay,
GIS maps,
all right.
yeah.
All right, any other questions about the policy 1.4 and the action items underneath there? Amy, thank you for that. Mr. Chair, then moving on to policy 1.5 on page 10, you'll see that that's strengthening shoreline protection and hazard mitigation. It is a carry forward, as are the 3 action items listed below. There is 1 new action item, so that's action 1.5.4, working waterfront pilots. And it says create a demonstration program with land trusts and Maryland agencies to install living shorelines at marinas, seafood landings, and aquaculture hubs, tracking wave energy reduction and habitat outcomes, that one being a new action item. IRG, is there any information that you can kind of share with us on this one?
Yeah, just would say that, the intent here is to add additional context for how we reduce erosion and wave damage in ways that really focus on living shorelines instead of hard armoring, which is also viable, but this is intended to add that characteristic. And the benefit here is, number one, you can have that more flexible approach that also creates habitat for fish, crabs, oysters, that supports water-dependent businesses as well in the county. And then the second piece, and I think this is important because it's a relatively new concept within the county, is that we're also creating new data that we can use, that the county, Maryland agencies, land trust can use to scale similar projects around the county. So it's sort of a pilot that gives us data to move forward. So that's the intent of this one.
Additional background here that's just helpful is the Department of Defense Chesapeake Bay program doing major investments across the Bay watershed related to living shorelines, and they're using a lot of the military installations as pilot projects to promote resilience and to protect infrastructure using these living shoreline solutions. There's a lot of demonstration projects that are starting to come out of that, some lessons learned, so that hopefully these can be applied in other portions of the county here outside of any military boundaries that will take advantage of the lessons learned of the pretty major systemic investment by the Department of Defense.
All right. If there are no other questions, we can move on, Mr. Chair, then to goal number 2, which is strengthen community and environmental adaptation for long-term resiliency. And you can see that many of these items, the policies and the action items, are carry forwards from the 2010 plan. But wanted to bring a couple of things to your attention because they're new. So you'll see on page 11 under policy 2.1, plan for sea level rise and long-term impacts. Of course, that's a carry forward, but you'll notice that there is a new action item, 2.1.4, regarding saltwater intrusion and hotspot plan. It says map and prioritize farm fields experiencing brackish inundation and implement adaptation pathways. And some examples are shifts, transition to marsh or easements, synchronized with upland migration corridors. IRG, any sort of background and information that you can provide the Planning Commission on this item?
Yeah, just would put here this hotspot plan. The idea here is to help the county get ahead of saltwater intrusion. So instead of reacting to farm losses after the fact, the idea is you map these hotspots and let you target support for the farm owners, the farmers who would be most affected. And then in an ideal world, you would then shift marginal fields that are most impacted, to more salt-tolerant crops uses. So it could be conservation, could be marsh, or just a more salt-tolerant crop. And that gives farmers sort of a heads up about what may be coming. And then the idea is to also line up these transitions with these upland migration corridors, so you're getting future wetland habitat space in place as we anticipate sea level rise.
I do have a question. We're talking about this as it impacts farm fields, but what about, is it just farm fields? We have some parks, and a good example is Myrtle Point Park. It's on the water. It's a beautiful area, lots of natural habitat in there. Would not something like this apply to other type places like Myrtle Point or others? And not just farms, or are we specifically talking about farms here?
It's a great point.
I would maybe say that 213, as it relates to adaptive retreat, is another place where some of those activities may be relevant. I think the saltwater intrusion is a very specific application because it does have an impact on agriculture.
Okay.
So there are habitat impacts to the inundation. Those tend to be more, are they eventually going to threaten infrastructure, is usually the policy play there. So I think 213 is kind of the complementary
Okay,
action there.
That makes sense?
yep.
Okay.
So I have a question about this hotspot plan. Would that be incentivizing these farms not to grow in these areas? Or, I mean, obviously land is money for a farmer. So if I just don't understand how it's to their benefit. I understand it's to the benefit of the erosion standpoint, but I have a hard time going to a farmer and telling them, hey, you don't want to plant this here, and you're losing out on money because of that.
So I think in looking at the verbiage here and sort of listening to what IRG is saying, I don't think it's the county saying you can't do this, you can't do that. It's just understanding where that salt water intrusion may come in and make the soil unpalatable for certain crops. And sort of, just providing education and awareness, I think is more of what's going on here rather than saying you can't do this, but just saying, hey, were you aware? Here are the issues that we have mapped so far, so that the farmers can help plan, better plan what they're hoping to do with their farms going forward.
So with that, providing the awareness, would we potentially provide solutions for them as to what, not necessarily this agency, but another agency could provide? These are some salt tolerant crops or something like that. I
We
mean,
certainly need to partner, absolutely. I'm going to tell you,
I
land use and
I'd
growth
like to get an
management.
answer.
Sure.
Obviously, define an issue, potential issue, but also to provide an option or an answer to this issue.
Well, and we do have a very robust part of the team in economic development that certainly deals with agriculture, and those lists may already exist.
Okay.
And so that's something that we can kind of dig a little deeper, no pun intended, but dig a little deeper there with DED when those partners are here later next month.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Jessica,
And DED already collaborates potentially with the NRCS district offices here. That would be a good question just to ask them ahead of time when you talk to the DED folks.
Sure.
Jessica, I would just say I don't really even understand 2.14. I mean, every waterfront property we have on the Potomac, Patuxent, St. Mary's River, and the Chesapeake Bay is a potential saltwater intrusion hotspot. I mean, if a farmer's been planting a farm for 50 years, they know what field is a potential to have saltwater. I don't really see what that does to me. It doesn't offer any, mitigation is don't plant there, or you shouldn't plant there, but it doesn't offer any incentives for them not to do it. So I don't quite understand what that does.
So I think what it's supposed to do is, one of the things that we talk about with farms is not only the sustainability of those farms, but the importance of maybe helping other farmers get started, right? And again, DED could better explain what sort of education and partnering they do with property owners to say, hey, I'm actually interested in farming. I'd like to start some sort of operation. And this would certainly help to educate them on what they have before they even get started. So I certainly understand that most folks know what they have, but as we're seeing, change in weather patterns, change in water, something like this certainly could be of value to farmers that are currently working the land, and the younger generations that want to start something new as we certainly tackle food insecurity. Does that answer your question?
Well, I mean, it sounds good. I still don't see what paragraph 2.14 really does. And I'd like to say, just giving you my opinion, I don't really understand that. But I understand what it's saying that it's going to do, but it doesn't really have anything with a farm property. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to be a necessary paragraph. I understand what you're saying.
Okay. Anything else on that one before we move on?
Let's move on.
All right. So the next new action item that you'll see is on page 12. Action 2.2.4, agricultural riparian buffers. So IRG, can you give us a little bit of background on this one, please?
Yeah, this one is, again, what I would say is it's related to the one we talked about earlier in terms of the goal of trying to, there are multiple strategies for slowing runoff. The one that we identified earlier was related to actually being able to potentially exploring a cost share program with BMPs that would reduce the water off of that. In certain locations, it might be more suitable to actually plant forested buffers. And this is one thing that they can obviously explore that through some of the federal cost share programs as well. And so where suitable, this would be an additional strategy.
Right. So this is, again, complementary. The idea being that you're going to slow and filter runoff before it even enters a ditch or a stream.
Any other questions on that? Okay, the next one is significantly new, and so IRG, if you can take the lead on sort of presenting this, but we're starting with policy, then 2.3, build community capacity for resiliency. And obviously, a lot of this is about education, sort of educating our community on some of the programs. You talked about incentives just a little bit ago, but sort of what programs and incentives are available to assist property owners, and certainly how to get our community, again, more educated so they can prepare for things going forward. IRG, are there any thoughts that, I mean, I think that this information here really speaks for itself. But if there's anything else that you would like to sort of share with us regarding this new policy?
Yeah, I think the reason we put this in as an inclusion item and recommendation was really because it's about the changing need in the community for understanding risk around these areas. In particular, really improving our citizens' understanding of awareness of flooding and how that's changing and how that's impacting folks around insurance. So that, once again, we're really hoping to give folks an opportunity to get in front of these issues and really be thinking proactively about how they can change their best practices or the way that they're doing business so that they can mitigate some of the risks over time and being more resilient. It is intended to be not only about reaching out to the public in terms of, you know, farmers and local organizations, but also just residents and folks who are building their homes and at a household level having some guidance around how they can reduce damage at a property scale or, you know, improve their ability to get a better insurance rate. So the whole idea here is just to build a more informed, better prepared community so that when an event happens or we're faced with losses and recoveries, we can mitigate those.
I'd like to point out too that 2.3.3 aligns with 3.1.3 of our previous the natural resources framework. So we want to make sure that we're consistent, or at least integrated.
Sure, yeah, we talked about sort of the cross-referencing last time.
Yeah.
Yep, great point.
Could you remind repeating again which number you said it aligns with?
233 aligns with 3.1.3 from our previous discussion under the environmental and natural resources framework.
Great, thank you.
All right. Any other items with regard to policy 2.3, or are we ready to move on to 2.4, our last item for the day?
Go ahead.
Okay. So policy 2.4 is ensure resilient infrastructure and public investments. And you'll see there are 4 action items that are, they're carried over, already implemented, and things that county has been doing actively, but you'll see that there is the last one here, action 2.4.5, rural roads and access. And this says prioritize storm hardening and elevation of farm to market roads and seafood landing access routes that experience repetitive closures, coordinated with the shoreline conditions assessment and road closure inventory. And so I think what this is getting at is understanding and recognizing the importance that our food producers in our county have, and understanding how storms affect them. And we talk about the importance of food security. We talk about the importance of trying to prioritize the health of our residents. And so making sure that in a storm situation, that those farms and food producers are able to get the food out, even in the aftermath of a storm, and what we need to do from a planning perspective. IRG, I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that one?
Well
I
said.
think you summarized it well. Yeah, that was a great summary.
All right. So that's our last item for the day. I don't know if there are any other sort of general comments or questions, but next time we'll be meeting, it'll be the brand new month, December 1st. We'll be here talking about transportation, a topic that is near and dear to everyone's heart, and moving on to public infrastructure and facilities. So, Mr. Chair, that's all I have for you today.
Okay. Anybody have anything?
That's Monday, you said?
Yes.
Gonna be.
Everybody good? We appreciate everybody coming out this afternoon.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank y'all. Have a good Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, thank you.